The day everything ended. Have you ever sat alone in a quiet room and felt tired of trying again, not just with life, but with yourself? This video is for that moment. In the next 90 minutes, I will tell you how I lost a marriage, almost lost my voice in English, and slowly rebuilt a new life in the United States. Not through big speeches or perfect grammar, but through weather, culture shock, love, mistakes, and small daily conversations. If you are tired, divorced, stuck, or thinking about quitting English, stay with me. This story might sound like yours. The day everything ended did not feel dramatic at first. There was no shouting. No movie-style argument. Just a calm sentence spoken in a small American kitchen, on a gray morning that smelled like coffee and rain. I think we should stop. That was it. Simple English. Perfect pronunciation. And somehow, it destroyed everything. At that moment, my brain did something strange. It understood the words, but it refused to accept the meaning. This is a common psychological reaction called emotional numbness. When the pain is too big, your brain presses a pause button. You are awake, but not really present. You nod. You breathe. You hear English, but it floats past you like noise. After the divorce papers were signed, I noticed something unexpected. My English got worse. Not better. I was living in the United States, surrounded by native speakers, yet my listening skills dropped. My mouth felt heavy. Words that used to come easily suddenly hid from me. Linguists explain this with something called affective filter theory. When stress, fear, or shame is high, your brain blocks language input. You hear sounds, but learning stops. Back then, I blamed myself. I thought, you live in America. You should speak better. But that thought only made the filter higher. The truth was simpler and kinder. My nervous system was tired. Divorce is not just a legal process. It is a biological shock. Your sleep breaks. Your memory weakens. Your attention span shrinks. And language learning, which needs calm focus, becomes very hard. I remember standing in a grocery store, staring at a shelf of cereal. 50 types. Bright boxes. Simple words. And still, I felt stupid. My brain whispered, you don't belong here. That whisper is dangerous. Neuroscience shows that the brain treats social rejection like physical pain. Being divorced in a foreign country felt like rejection on every level, emotional, cultural, linguistic. Climate did not help. I had moved to a colder state after the separation. Long winters. Short days. Less sunlight. Seasonal affective disorder is real, and it affects mood and motivation. When the sky is gray for weeks, your energy drops. You speak less. You listen less. You survive. But here is the quiet truth no one tells you. You do not need motivation at your lowest point. You need permission to be slow. One night, alone in a small apartment, I stopped forcing myself to study English. No apps. No grammar books. Instead, I listened to the heater making soft clicking sounds. I noticed how Americans talk about weather all the time. Not because they are boring, but because weather is emotional safety. Talking about rain is easier than talking about loss. The next day, I tried something new. I spoke one sentence. Just one. To the cashier. Cold today, huh? She smiled and answered. That was it. No correction. No judgment. My brain felt a small reward. Dopamine. The chemical of learning. This is important. Research shows that the brain learns better through small wins than big goals. After divorce, your identity is broken. Setting huge goals, like be fluent again, can feel impossible. But small social exchanges rebuild confidence quietly. As days passed, I started paying attention to how English sounded in real life. Not fast. Not perfect. Full of pauses. Fillers. Emotion. I realized something funny. Native speakers do not speak like textbooks. They speak like humans. Tired humans. Confused humans. Kind humans. That realization changed everything. English was no longer a test I had failed. It became a mirror of life. Messy, slow, and still meaningful. I began telling myself a different story. Not, I lost my marriage. But I survived a chapter. Psychologists call this narrative reframing. The brain needs a story to heal. When you change the story, you change the future behavior. In that first chapter after divorce, I did not rebuild love. I did not rebuild confidence. I rebuilt something smaller but more powerful. I rebuilt the habit of listening, to others, to the country around me, and to myself. If you are watching this and feeling behind, remember this. Silence is not failure. Slowness is not weakness. Your brain is not broken. It is protecting you. And sometimes, the end of a marriage is not the end of a life. It is the moment you finally stop running and start listening. Starting over in a cold place. The first winter after my divorce felt less like a season and more like a test I never signed up for. Snow arrived early, thick and quiet, covering everything I thought I knew about starting over. The streets looked clean, almost peaceful, but inside my body, nothing felt settled. Cold has a way of entering not just your skin, but your thoughts. And when you are rebuilding a life in a new country, climate is not a background detail. It becomes a character in the story. I had moved north for work, believing distance would bring clarity. Instead, it brought silence. In warmer states, people linger outside, talk more, smile faster. Here, doors closed quickly. Coats stayed zipped. Conversations were short and practical. At first, I thought my English had gotten worse again. But slowly, I realized something deeper. The environment shapes communication. Sociolinguists have studied this for years. In colder climates, people tend to speak less, conserve energy, and protect personal space. It is not unfriendly. It is adaptive. Still, adaptation takes time. Each morning, I checked the weather app like it was a medical report. 20 degrees. Wind warning. Snow expected. My motivation dropped before I even left the apartment. The brain links physical discomfort with avoidance behavior. When your body is cold, your mind wants safety, not challenges like speaking a second language. I noticed how this affected my listening skills. In warmer months, my ears stayed open. In winter, they closed. Head down. Hands in pockets. Less eye contact. Less language input. Not because I didn't care, but because my nervous system was in survival mode. One day, while waiting for a bus in the snow, I heard two strangers talking about heating bills. Simple words. Repeated phrases. Complaints mixed with humor. I understood everything, yet I didn't join. Later, I asked myself why. The answer surprised me. Fear of interrupting. Fear of sounding out of place. Cold makes people move inward, emotionally and socially. Psychology explains this through the concept of cognitive load. When your brain is busy regulating temperature, balance, and stress, it has less capacity for language processing. This is why learning feels harder in uncomfortable environments. It is not laziness. It is biology. Instead of fighting this, I changed my strategy. I stopped expecting myself to speak fluently outside. I brought English indoors. Warm light. Hot tea. Quiet podcasts with slow, clear voices. Stories instead of lessons. Listening without pressure. The brain relaxes when it feels safe, and safety accelerates learning. I also started observing how Americans talk about climate as a form of connection. Stay warm. Drive safe. This winter is brutal. These phrases are not small talk. They are emotional signals. They say, I see you surviving this too. When I began responding with simple agreement, conversations lasted longer. Not deeper, but warmer. On weekends, I visited public libraries. Heated spaces. Soft noise. People from everywhere. Immigrants, students, elderly locals. I listened to English spoken with accents, pauses, imperfections. That was comforting. It reminded me that fluency is not about sounding native. It is about being understood. There is a cultural myth in America that starting over means starting strong. New city. New job. New confidence. Reality is slower. Real rebuilding begins quietly, often in discomfort. Neuroscience shows that the brain rewires itself through repetition under low stress. Not through pressure. Not through shame. Winter taught me patience. Some days, I spoke only one sentence. Other days, none. I stopped counting progress in vocabulary and started measuring it in calmness. Was my body less tense when I heard English? Was my breath slower when I responded? These were signs of healing. The cold also gave me structure. Regular routines. Predictable days. Consistency matters after emotional loss. It tells the brain that life is stable again. Once stability returns, curiosity follows. And curiosity is the real engine of language learning. By the end of that winter, something had shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. English felt less threatening. The city felt less distant. I had not rebuilt a social life yet, but I had rebuilt trust with myself. Starting over in a cold place did not harden me. It softened my expectations. It taught me that growth does not always feel warm. Sometimes, it feels numb before it feels hopeful. And if you are learning English while rebuilding your life, remember this. Progress does not always sound loud. Sometimes, it sounds like silence slowly turning into understanding. When English felt like a wall. English did not disappear from my life after the divorce. It became something worse. It stayed everywhere, but it stopped letting me in. Conversations sounded like they were happening behind thick glass. I could see people laughing, nodding, reacting, but my brain arrived a few seconds too late. By the time I understood a sentence, the moment had already moved on. This feeling is deeply frustrating, and it has nothing to do with intelligence. It is what happens when language turns into a wall instead of a bridge. In the months after separation, I noticed a strange pattern. When I listened to English podcasts alone, I understood fairly well. When I watched movies with subtitles, I felt almost confident. But the moment a real person spoke to me, face to face, unpredictable, fast, my mind froze. Words stacked up like bricks, blocking the meaning. Psychologists call this performance anxiety combined with social threat response. Your brain does not separate language from identity. When you speak, you are not just sharing information. You are exposing yourself. After divorce, your sense of self is already cracked. Any situation that risks judgment feels dangerous. So my brain did what it thought was smart. It built a wall. The wall sounded like excuses. They speak too fast. My English used to be better. I'll answer later. But underneath those excuses was fear. Fear of sounding broken in a language that is not your first. Fear of confirming the quiet belief that you failed not only in marriage, but in starting a new life. Neuroscience explains this with the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. When it senses threat, it hijacks cognitive resources. Blood flows away from the language centers and toward survival responses. Your ears hear sound, but your brain prioritizes safety over comprehension. That is why forcing yourself to try harder does not work. The harder you push, the higher the wall grows. I learned this the hard way during a work meeting. Simple agenda. Friendly people. But my heart raced, palms sweating, thoughts blank. Someone asked me a direct question. Easy words. Familiar topic. Still, my answer came out slow, awkward, incomplete. The room stayed polite, but my inner voice was brutal. That night, I almost quit. Not just the job. The language. I thought maybe English was not for me anymore. What stopped me was a small realization. Walls are built for protection, not punishment. My brain was not sabotaging me. It was trying to keep me safe during a vulnerable time. That shift, from self-blame to self-understanding, changed everything. Instead of attacking the wall, I decided to walk alongside it. I stopped aiming for fluent responses and focused on comprehension first. I allowed silence. I let people repeat themselves. I used short answers without apology. This reduced pressure, and pressure reduction lowers the affective filter, the emotional barrier that blocks language input. Science supports this. Studies in second language acquisition show that learners progress faster when anxiety is low, even if exposure is imperfect. Calm beats intensity. I also began practicing something unexpected, listening to emotions, not words. Tone. Speed. Facial expression. I noticed that meaning often lives beyond grammar. Even when I missed details, I caught intent. Kindness. Urgency. Humor. This made conversations feel human again, not like exams. At home, I practiced speaking out loud to no one. Not drills. Stories. I told myself what happened during the day, slowly, simply. This activates narrative memory, which is stronger and more emotionally grounded than isolated vocabulary practice. The brain remembers stories because it recognizes patterns of cause and effect. Little by little, the wall changed texture. It was still there, but it had cracks. One afternoon, a coworker asked how I was doing. I paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I decided to answer honestly. Still adjusting. Winter is hard. My sentence was imperfect. My accent obvious. But the response I got was warmth. Shared experience. Connection. That moment mattered more than any grammar lesson. Culturally, America values confidence in speech, but it also respects authenticity. When you stop pretending to be fine, conversations become easier. Language flows better when you allow yourself to be real. Over time, I realized something powerful. English did not feel like a wall because I lacked skill. It felt like a wall because I was still healing. Language mirrors your inner state. When you are guarded, it feels blocked. When you soften, it opens. If you are stuck at this stage, here is the quiet truth. You do not need to break the wall. You need to rest against it until you feel safe enough to see the door. That door opens through patience, small interactions, and kindness toward yourself. Not through force. And one day, without announcing itself, English stops feeling like something you must climb over. It starts feeling like something you can lean on. Culture shock after marriage. Marriage did not prepare me for America. Living in America prepared me to understand why my marriage failed. That realization came slowly, through small moments that felt normal on the surface but heavy underneath. Culture shock is often described as food, language, or holidays. In reality, it hides inside expectations, especially inside a relationship. After the divorce, I replayed conversations in my head, trying to find the exact sentence where everything went wrong. The words were simple. The grammar correct. But something invisible kept breaking between us. That something was culture. In many cultures, love is shown through endurance. You stay. You tolerate. You sacrifice quietly. In the United States, love is often expressed through boundaries. You speak up. You protect your needs. You leave if those needs are not met. Neither is right or wrong. But when two systems collide inside one marriage, misunderstandings grow fast. I realized this too late. When my partner said, "I need space," I heard rejection. In American culture, that sentence often means self-care. When I stayed silent during conflict, believing patience would calm things down, it was interpreted as emotional distance. Silence, in this context, was not respect. It was absence. Language played a cruel role here. I understood English well enough to communicate facts, but not well enough to navigate emotional nuance. Words like independence, privacy, and personal growth sounded positive, yet they landed like threats. My brain translated them through my own cultural lens, not theirs. Psychologists explain this through cultural schemas, mental frameworks shaped by upbringing. When stress is high, the brain defaults to its original schema. After moving to the U.S., I learned English, but my emotional operating system stayed the same. Marriage exposed that gap brutally. This affected my listening skills more than I expected. During arguments, my ears shut down. Not because I didn't understand vocabulary, but because the emotional meaning felt unsafe. The amygdala again took control. Language became noise. After separation, I began observing American couples differently. In cafes, on sidewalks, at school events. They negotiated openly. They disagreed without apology. They used "I feel" more than "you should." These patterns are deeply cultural, and they are reflected in language structure itself. English encourages directness. Short sentences. Clear subjects. Ownership of emotion. I need, I want, I can't. For someone raised to prioritize harmony, these sentences can feel selfish. But in American culture, they are often seen as honest. Understanding this changed how I listened. I stopped searching for hidden meanings behind every sentence. I started taking words at face value. This reduced mental overload and improved comprehension instantly. Listening became less emotional decoding and more simple understanding. There is scientific support for this shift. Cognitive linguistics shows that reducing interpretive ambiguity lowers processing effort. When you stop guessing intent, your brain frees up space to process language itself. I practiced this deliberately. When someone said, "I'm busy," I stopped assuming emotional distance. I accepted the literal meaning. Busy means busy. This small change lowered anxiety and improved my confidence in conversations. I also reflected on how cultural mismatch affected motivation to learn English. During the marriage, English felt like a battlefield. Every argument happened in a language that was not fully mine. That created an unconscious association between English and failure. Breaking that association was crucial. I began using English in neutral, low-stakes contexts, talking to librarians, neighbors, baristas. No emotional history. No expectations. Just language doing what it is meant to do, connect briefly, then let go. Slowly, English softened again. Culture shock after marriage taught me something uncomfortable but freeing. Love does not fail only because people are bad or careless. Sometimes, systems collide. Expectations clash. And language becomes the messenger that gets blamed for the war. Once I saw this clearly, I stopped hating my past self for not speaking better. I had been translating more than words. I had been translating an entire worldview. If you are learning English through life in America, remember this. Fluency is not just vocabulary. It is cultural permission to speak differently, to feel differently, to set boundaries without guilt. And when you learn to hear English without filtering it through old fears, something shifts. Conversations feel lighter. Listening feels safer. You stop bracing for impact. Marriage ended, but understanding began. And that understanding quietly rebuilt my relationship with English, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Silence inside a busy country. America is loud. Cars never stop. Screens glow everywhere. People talk on phones while walking, eating, working. From the outside, it looks like a country that never sleeps. But after my divorce, I discovered a quieter America, one that lives inside you when you feel disconnected from everything around you. My days were full of sound, yet my inner world was silent. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that presses on your chest and makes even simple conversations feel exhausting. I went to work, bought groceries, nodded at neighbors, and returned home without saying more than a few sentences. English was present all day, but I barely touched it. This kind of silence is common after emotional loss. Psychologists call it social withdrawal, a natural response when the brain tries to conserve energy. After stress or trauma, your system limits interaction to reduce overload. The problem is that language learning depends on interaction. When silence becomes a habit, progress slows. I noticed how carefully I avoided speaking. I chose self-checkout machines. I wore headphones without music. I smiled instead of answering. Each avoidance felt small, harmless. Together, they built a routine of isolation. The strange part was that no one pushed me away. America did not reject me. The distance came from inside. This is important to understand, because many language learners blame society for their loneliness. Often, the barrier is not external. It is internal protection. At night, the silence grew louder. No shared dinner conversations. No casual storytelling. Just the hum of the refrigerator and my own thoughts repeating the same questions. Did I make the right choices? Did I lose too much? Will I ever feel normal again? Silence affects the brain in complex ways. Short periods of quiet help memory and creativity. Long-term social silence does the opposite. It increases rumination, repetitive thinking, and lowers confidence. When you don't hear your own voice often, it starts to feel unfamiliar. I realized something uncomfortable. I was losing not just fluency, but identity. Language is how we confirm who we are to others. Without it, you begin to feel invisible. One evening, I sat in a crowded cafe. Laptops open. Conversations overlapping. Laughter bursting randomly. I listened without joining. At first, this made me feel worse. Like watching life through a window. But then I paid attention differently. I noticed rhythm. Americans often speak in short emotional bursts. Statements rise and fall. Pauses carry meaning. Silence is allowed, but not heavy. It passes quickly. That observation mattered. It showed me that silence itself is not the enemy. Prolonged silence filled with fear is. From a neuroscience perspective, the brain needs feedback loops. You speak, someone responds, your brain adjusts. Without that loop, language stagnates. But restarting the loop does not require deep conversation. It requires presence. The next day, I tried an experiment. 1 sentence per day. Not more. No pressure to continue. 1 genuine sentence spoken out loud to another human being. The first day, it was basic. Thank you. Have a good one. My voice sounded flat. But the response came back naturally. Friendly. Automatic. That was the loop. The second day, I added a comment about the weather. Predictable, yes. But emotionally safe. Weather talk in America is social glue. It allows connection without vulnerability. Over time, those sentences stretched naturally. Not because I forced them, but because silence lost its grip. The brain began to expect response instead of danger. There is research supporting this. Exposure therapy shows that gradual, low-risk exposure reduces anxiety more effectively than sudden immersion. By choosing small interactions, I retrained my nervous system to associate English with safety again. I also learned to sit comfortably in shared silence. Not all quiet moments need filling. Sometimes, listening without speaking is enough. This balance matters. When silence is chosen, it feels calm. When silence is avoided, it feels heavy. Culturally, America values independence, but it also values participation. Even small verbal signals, yeah, right, exactly, show engagement. Once I started using these, conversations flowed more easily, even when my sentences stayed short. The busy country did not change. I did. Silence stopped being a hiding place and became a starting point. I learned that you do not need to become louder to belong. You need to become present. If you feel lost in a country full of noise, remember this. Your voice does not disappear because it is weak. It disappears because it is resting. And when you allow it to return slowly, sentence by sentence, silence turns from a wall into a doorway. Learning English from daily pain. Pain has a strange way of becoming a teacher when you stop running from it. After months of silence and careful distance, my life in America narrowed down to small routines. Wake up. Work. Eat. Sleep. Nothing dramatic. Nothing inspiring. And yet, this was the period when my English began to grow again, not from ambition, but from necessity shaped by emotion. I did not return to textbooks. I returned to life. Daily pain made lessons unavoidable. When something hurts, the brain pays attention. This is basic neuroscience. Emotional relevance strengthens memory encoding. Words learned in meaningful moments stay longer than words memorized in comfort. My first real classroom was the grocery store. Not the aisles, but the checkout line. Prices were higher than expected. Cashiers spoke fast, but predictably. Did you find everything? Do you need a bag? These sentences repeated every day, creating rhythm. Repetition with emotional context is powerful. Each time I answered, my confidence grew a fraction. Then came phone calls. Insurance. Utilities. Appointments. No subtitles. No rewind button. Just real-time listening. The fear was intense at first. My heart raced before dialing. But after each call, even failed ones, my nervous system relaxed a little. Exposure reduces threat response when paired with survival. I survived every call. Psychology explains this through desensitization. The brain learns that the feared stimulus, spoken English, does not lead to harm. Once safety is established, learning accelerates. Pain also taught me to simplify. Instead of searching for perfect sentences, I used clear, basic structures. Subject. Verb. Need. I need to change my plan. I don't understand this charge. Simple English is not weak English. It is functional English. And function builds fluency. Weather continued to shape my days. Snowstorms forced conversations with neighbors. Complaints became connections. This winter is rough. Shared discomfort creates social bonds faster than shared success. Through these moments, I learned natural phrasing that no app teaches. Children entered the picture again when I began helping at school events. Forms. Rules. Emails. American education language is direct and legalistic. At first, it overwhelmed me. But necessity sharpened focus. When something matters, your child, your responsibility, the brain tolerates discomfort better. There is scientific evidence for this. Motivation driven by personal relevance activates the brain's reward system more effectively than abstract goals. Learning English for the future felt vague. Learning English to protect my family felt urgent. I also started narrating my pain quietly, in English, to myself. Not dramatically. Just facts. Today was hard. I felt lonely. This practice improved emotional vocabulary and listening at the same time. Speaking engages auditory feedback. You hear yourself and adjust. It is a closed learning loop. One surprising benefit was pronunciation. Emotional speech is more natural. When you speak about real feelings, intonation improves automatically. The brain prioritizes expression over accuracy, and that often sounds more native. Daily pain also stripped away ego. I stopped pretending to understand everything. I asked people to repeat. I said slow down without shame. This invited kindness. Most people adjusted willingly. Language is a cooperative act, not a performance. Culturally, Americans respect effort. When they see you trying, they meet you halfway. This reduced my fear of judgment and increased my willingness to speak. Over time, English stopped feeling like an academic subject. It became a survival tool. Then a connection tool. Then, slowly, a comfort. There were still bad days. Misunderstandings. Awkward pauses. But the pain attached to them faded faster. The brain began to categorize these moments as normal, not dangerous. Looking back, I see that pain gave my learning structure. It told me what mattered. It filtered out unnecessary complexity. It forced me into the present moment, where real language lives. If you are struggling to learn English while carrying emotional weight, this matters. You do not need a perfect environment. You need a real one. Painful experiences are not interruptions to learning. They are accelerators when approached with patience. Your life is already a lesson. Every interaction is material. Every mistake is data. And one day, you realize something quietly powerful. The language you rebuilt through pain is stronger than the one you learned through comfort. It stays with you. Because it was earned. Love appears unexpectedly. Love did not arrive with fireworks or clear intentions. It entered quietly, almost accidentally, during a period when I was no longer searching for anything. By then, English had stopped feeling like an enemy, but it still wasn't a place of comfort. I could function. I could survive. I did not expect connection. That mattered more than I knew. Psychology tells us that attachment forms best when the nervous system is regulated. When you are desperate, you miss signals. When you are calm, you notice them. I was calm in a tired, neutral way. No hope. No fear. Just presence. The first conversations were small. Not romantic. Not meaningful on the surface. Shared jokes about work. Observations about the weather. Complaints about traffic. The kind of language that feels boring until you realize it is safe. Safety is the foundation of intimacy, and safety is also the foundation of language learning. Something interesting happened during those exchanges. My listening improved without effort. I wasn't translating. I wasn't preparing responses. I was simply there. Neuroscience explains this clearly. When emotional stakes feel low, the brain's language centers operate without interference from the amygdala. Comprehension becomes automatic. Love, at this stage, was not a feeling. It was a reduction of tension. I noticed that my answers became more fluid. Not more complex. Just more natural. I used pauses comfortably. I laughed at the right moments. I missed words and didn't panic. Communication felt human instead of strategic. This is how language is meant to work. Culturally, American relationships often begin with emotional lightness. Humor before depth. Ease before commitment. In the past, I misread this as a lack of seriousness. This time, I listened differently. I accepted the pace instead of questioning it. That acceptance changed my English again. I stopped searching for perfect expressions of emotion. I let feelings stay simple. I like that. That made my day. I'm glad we talked. These sentences are not impressive, but they are honest. Honesty carries its own fluency. There is research showing that emotional engagement enhances language retention. Words learned in positive social contexts are recalled more easily and used more confidently. This explains why my vocabulary suddenly felt alive. It was tied to memory, laughter, and warmth. I also noticed how misunderstandings softened. When I didn't understand a joke, I asked. When my phrasing sounded strange, it didn't matter. The environment was forgiving. Forgiveness accelerates learning. Love appeared unexpectedly not because I was ready to love, but because I was no longer guarded. Divorce had stripped away illusion. Pain had simplified me. What remained was clarity. This clarity showed up in language too. I spoke less, but with more intention. I listened more than I explained. I noticed tone, not just words. Emotional literacy improved alongside linguistic ability. One evening, during a long walk, I realized something subtle. I was thinking in English without noticing. Not all the time. Not perfectly. But enough to surprise myself. The shift did not come from studying. It came from belonging, even briefly, in someone else's attention. Belonging is a powerful cognitive state. When you feel included, the brain releases oxytocin, which reduces stress and enhances learning. Love, even in its early form, creates optimal conditions for language growth. This was not a fairy tale beginning. There were boundaries. Past scars. Honest conversations about expectations. But those conversations happened in English, slowly, carefully, without fear. That alone felt like progress beyond any exam score. I learned something essential during this time. You do not need perfect English to be loved. You need presence. Language grows naturally in environments where presence is welcomed. Unexpected love did not fix my life. It did not erase the past. But it changed my relationship with English from effort to expression. From survival to sharing. If you are learning English and feel disconnected, remember this. Progress does not always come from discipline. Sometimes, it comes from gentle human moments you did not plan. Love does not arrive to save you. It arrives when you stop asking it to. And when it does, language often follows, quietly, willingly, like it was waiting for permission. Different climate, different hearts. Moving across America taught me something no language course ever mentioned. Climate does not just change the weather. It changes people. And when people change, the way they speak, love, and listen changes too. After rebuilding parts of my life in the cold, I spent time traveling between regions for work and family reasons. The contrast was immediate. In warmer states, conversations opened faster. Strangers smiled more. Small talk stretched into stories. In colder places, words were efficient, contained, purposeful. Neither style was better. They were simply shaped by environment. This mattered deeply for my English. Language is not neutral. It adapts to lifestyle. In hot climates, people linger outside. Speech becomes relaxed, expressive, rhythmic. In cold climates, people move quickly between spaces. Language becomes practical, trimmed of excess emotion. When I stopped judging these differences, listening became easier. I stopped expecting the same emotional signals everywhere. There is research supporting this. Environmental psychology shows that temperature influences social behavior. Warmer environments encourage openness and social interaction. Colder environments encourage conservation of energy and emotional restraint. These patterns appear in language use, tone, length of sentences, even choice of words. At first, I took these differences personally. When someone sounded distant, I assumed rejection. When conversations felt short, I blamed my English. That interpretation created unnecessary stress. Stress again raised the affective filter, blocking comprehension. Once I reframed the situation, everything shifted. It wasn't about me. It was about climate shaping communication norms. This insight also changed how I practiced English. I stopped aiming for one correct way to speak. Instead, I adapted. In warmer regions, I allowed my speech to slow down, expand, include small emotional comments. In colder regions, I respected brevity. I learned to say more with fewer words. Adaptability is a high-level language skill. It requires awareness, not perfection. I also noticed how relationships formed differently. In some places, emotional closeness developed quickly. In others, trust built slowly through consistency. Neither approach was wrong. But expecting warmth in a reserved culture led to disappointment. Expecting efficiency in a warm culture led to confusion. Understanding this saved my energy. The heart adapts the same way language does. In fast-paced cities, love moves carefully, often delayed by schedules and independence. In slower environments, connection deepens through shared time. Climate influences rhythm. Rhythm influences emotion. When I accepted this, my listening improved again. I stopped listening only for words and started listening for pace. Was this conversation meant to be efficient or expressive? Once I answered that, meaning became clearer. Cognitive science explains this through contextual prediction. The brain understands faster when it correctly predicts patterns. By adjusting my expectations based on environment, I reduced cognitive load. English stopped feeling unpredictable. I also learned something important about myself. I had been trying to sound the same everywhere. That is exhausting. True fluency allows flexibility. You do not lose yourself by adapting. You expand. This was especially important in relationships. Emotional misunderstandings often came from mismatched expectations shaped by place. Once I saw that, conflicts softened. Conversations became clearer, calmer. Even silence felt different depending on climate. In some places, silence meant comfort. In others, it meant distance. Recognizing that difference prevented unnecessary anxiety. These lessons extended to family life, friendships, and future plans. America is not one culture. It is many climates layered together. Learning English here means learning how environment shapes expression. If you struggle with listening comprehension, consider this. It may not be your vocabulary. It may be your expectations. You might be listening with the wrong emotional setting for the place you are in. Adjusting that setting is powerful. By the time I finished traveling through these regions, English felt more alive. More flexible. More forgiving. I no longer chased one version of fluency. I allowed many. Different climates shaped different hearts. And by understanding that, my own heart softened. Language followed. Because fluency is not just about words. It is about reading the room, the weather, the rhythm of life around you, and letting your voice move with it instead of against it. Family, kids, and new rules. Family life in America does not announce itself loudly. It shows up in emails, forms, calendars, and rules written in plain English that somehow still feel heavy. When children entered the center of my daily routine again, English changed its role completely. It was no longer about survival or connection. It became responsibility. Responsibility sharpens attention. School mornings began with notes from teachers. Short sentences. Polite tone. Clear expectations. Please remember. Students must. We encourage parents to. This was not emotional language, but it carried emotional weight. When something involves children, the brain prioritizes accuracy. Fear of misunderstanding increases focus, but it can also increase anxiety. At first, I read every message 3 times. Slowly. Carefully. My heart raced over simple instructions. Lunch policies. Pick-up times. Emergency contacts. I understood the words, but I worried about missing meaning. In parenting, mistakes feel expensive. Psychology explains this reaction clearly. When stakes are high, the brain increases vigilance. Attention improves, but flexibility drops. This makes language feel rigid. One misunderstood sentence can spiral into imagined consequences. To manage this, I changed how I listened and read. I separated facts from emotions. What is required? What is optional? What is tone, not instruction? This reduced overload. Cognitive science shows that chunking information into functional categories improves comprehension under stress. English became procedural. Lists. Schedules. Clear verbs. Sign. Return. Attend. This type of language is less expressive but highly learnable. Repetition is constant. Over time, these phrases became automatic. Automation frees mental energy. Children also changed how I spoke. Conversations became simpler, slower, more intentional. Explaining rules, emotions, and expectations in basic English forced clarity. There was no room for unnecessary complexity. Kids don't respond to perfection. They respond to honesty and consistency. Interestingly, this improved my fluency. Teaching or explaining activates deeper language processing. You cannot hide behind memorized phrases. You must understand what you are saying. This strengthens neural pathways. Family life also exposed cultural differences sharply. In American households, children are encouraged to express opinions early. Schools reinforce this. Use your voice. Explain your feelings. This approach requires language. Silence is not neutral. It is interpreted. At first, this felt uncomfortable. I came from a background where adults spoke more and children listened. Adjusting required emotional and linguistic flexibility. But once I adapted, conversations at home became training grounds. Safe spaces to practice English with patience. Mistakes were forgiven instantly. That forgiveness mattered. Research in language acquisition highlights the role of low-pressure environments. Family settings, when supportive, offer exactly that. Language becomes relational, not performative. There were difficult moments too. Parent-teacher meetings. Behavioral discussions. Legal terminology around custody and healthcare. English here was formal, precise, and emotionally loaded. I prepared in advance. I wrote notes. I asked for clarification without shame. Each successful interaction built confidence not just in English, but in my ability to function fully in this system. I noticed something subtle over time. My listening improved faster than my speaking. That is normal. Listening develops first when emotional stakes are high. The brain gathers information before acting. This is a survival pattern. Instead of fighting it, I respected it. I allowed myself to listen more than speak in complex situations. Silence became strategic, not fearful. Family routines created repetition. Dinner conversations. Homework questions. Weekend plans. These cycles reinforced vocabulary naturally. Words tied to real life stick longer than abstract ones. I also learned how American families use language to negotiate. Let's talk about it. What do you think? How can we fix this? These phrases invite dialogue. Using them shifted dynamics. Authority softened. Cooperation increased. This affected my identity. I was no longer just an immigrant learning English. I was a parent operating in English. That role carries dignity. Dignity reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety improves language processing. Over time, English stopped feeling external. It became part of family structure. Part of daily care. part of love. If you are raising children or managing family life while learning English, remember this. You are already using advanced language skills. You are interpreting rules, emotions, and systems under pressure. That is not beginner work. Family does not make language learning easier. It makes it meaningful. And meaning accelerates mastery. One day, without noticing, you realize English is no longer something you practice. It is something you live. English became a bridge. At some point, without a clear date or celebration, English stopped standing in front of me like an obstacle. It moved quietly beneath my feet and became a bridge. Not a dramatic transformation. No sudden fluency. Just a steady feeling that I could cross from one moment to another without falling. This change did not come from confidence. It came from usefulness. English began connecting parts of my life that used to feel separate. Work conversations no longer drained me completely. Family discussions felt clearer. Even silence felt shared instead of isolating. The language had stopped demanding attention and started supporting movement. Cognitive science explains this shift as automaticity. When a skill becomes automatic, it requires less conscious effort. The brain moves it from active processing to background support. This frees mental space for emotion, empathy, and decision-making. Language becomes infrastructure. I noticed this first in conflict. Small disagreements no longer triggered panic. I could listen fully, respond simply, and stay present. English allowed me to pause without disappearing. That mattered. In the past, misunderstanding felt dangerous. Now it felt manageable. Bridges are built from repetition and trust. Every successful conversation added one plank. Not perfect conversations. Real ones. Apologies. Clarifications. Laughter. Repair. Repair is essential. Relationships grow stronger not from avoiding mistakes, but from fixing them together. Language played a central role in that repair. I also realized that my accent had stopped bothering me. It was still there. But it no longer felt like a flaw. It felt like texture. Sociolinguistics shows that accents often signal identity and resilience. Once shame fades, expression expands. This was especially clear in friendships. I stopped filtering my personality to fit grammar. Humor returned. Sarcasm landed. Emotion surfaced. English became flexible enough to carry who I was, not who I was trying to be. There is an important psychological principle here. When language aligns with identity, motivation becomes intrinsic. You no longer learn to impress or survive. You use language to exist. That is when growth stabilizes. The bridge metaphor became literal during travel. Airports. Hotels. Conversations with strangers. Small negotiations. I trusted English to carry me through unfamiliar spaces. That trust reduced stress. Reduced stress improved listening. The cycle reinforced itself. Even mistakes changed character. They became signals, not failures. When someone looked confused, I rephrased. When I missed a joke, I asked. The fear response was gone. Curiosity replaced it. This shift affected how others responded to me. People leaned in instead of pulling back. Not because my English was perfect, but because my presence was relaxed. Humans mirror nervous systems. Calm invites calm. From a neurological perspective, this reflects co-regulation. When one person remains regulated, it helps others stay regulated too. Conversations flow better. Misunderstandings resolve faster. English also became a bridge between past and future. I could talk about my divorce without collapsing. I could describe my growth without exaggeration. I could plan without panic. Language gave structure to time. Narrative psychology shows that telling your story coherently helps integrate traumatic experiences. When you can explain where you have been, you regain control over where you are going. English gave me that narrative again. The bridge was not just outward. It was inward. I began thinking more clearly. Decision-making improved. Emotional labeling became precise. Instead of vague discomfort, I could name feelings. Naming reduces intensity. The brain calms when it understands. I noticed that my listening skills had matured. I listened for intention, not perfection. I could follow conversations even when I missed words. Context filled gaps automatically. This is advanced comprehension, and it develops through experience, not study. Work meetings became collaborative instead of exhausting. Family discussions became cooperative instead of tense. Even disagreements felt respectful. English allowed negotiation instead of avoidance. Importantly, the bridge did not erase my first language or identity. It connected them. Code switching became a strength. I could choose expressions consciously. Cultural awareness sharpened. This is what true fluency looks like. Not speed. Not complexity. But choice. If you are still struggling, this matters. You do not need to conquer English. You need to let it connect. Bridges are not built to impress. They are built to be crossed daily. One ordinary day, you realize you are no longer preparing to speak. You are speaking. You are no longer bracing to listen. You are listening. English becomes invisible in the best way. It stops being the story and starts supporting the story you are living. And once that happens, you are free to move forward, not away from your past, but across it. Can you really start again? The question arrived quietly, without drama, during an ordinary moment. Not in a crisis. Not at a turning point. Just a pause between tasks when life finally felt stable enough to ask something honest. Can you really start again, or do you just learn to decorate the ruins? I used to think starting again meant erasing the past. New city. New routines. New language. That belief created pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Resistance slows everything, especially learning. Over time, I learned a gentler truth. Starting again is not deletion. It is integration. Psychology calls this post-traumatic growth. After loss, some people do not return to who they were. They become someone more complex. Not happier all the time. Not fearless. But clearer. That clarity changes how the brain processes information, including language. By this point in my journey, English no longer frightened me. But doubt still visited. Doubt is quieter than fear and harder to notice. It sounds reasonable. It asks questions that feel practical but hide insecurity. Is this as good as it gets? Did I miss my chance? Am I too late? These thoughts affected my listening again, subtly. When doubt is active, attention narrows. You hear words but miss possibility. Conversations feel flat. Language loses color. I noticed this pattern and chose to respond differently. Instead of fighting doubt, I questioned it. Where did this belief come from? Often, it came from comparison. Others seemed more settled, more fluent, more successful. Comparison is a cognitive shortcut that saves energy but distorts reality. Neuroscience shows that the brain prefers familiar narratives, even negative ones. Starting again threatens familiarity. Doubt tries to protect you by keeping you small. Understanding this helped me stop treating doubt as truth. I tested the idea of starting again in small ways. New habits. New responsibilities. New conversations with unfamiliar people. Not to prove anything, but to observe my response. Each time, I noticed something encouraging. I adapted faster than before. Recovery time shortened. Mistakes bothered me less. This is learning maturity. Early learners panic at errors. Advanced learners extract information from them. I had crossed that line without noticing. Language reflected this shift. I began asking deeper questions in English. Not complex ones, but honest ones. What matters to you? How did you get here? These questions invite stories. Stories invite connection. Connection invites confidence. Listening at this stage felt different. I was no longer listening to survive or impress. I was listening to understand. That intention changes everything. The brain processes meaning more efficiently when curiosity replaces evaluation. There is strong evidence for this. Studies on intrinsic motivation show increased retention and comprehension when learners are genuinely interested in content. Starting again requires curiosity more than courage. Emotionally, starting again meant allowing joy without suspicion. After divorce, happiness can feel dangerous, like something temporary or undeserved. This emotional guarding limits expression. Once I noticed it, I practiced allowing good moments to stand without explanation. English benefited immediately. Joy improves prosody, rhythm and intonation. Speech becomes more musical. Listeners respond better. Feedback loops improve. Language grows. I also reflected on identity. Who was I now? Not married. Not lost. Not new. Something in between. Identity reconstruction is a critical phase after major change. Language is the tool we use to test identity in the world. I experimented with describing myself differently. Not by titles, but by values. I'm learning. I care about stability. I value honesty. These statements felt true. They felt grounding. Speaking them in English reinforced them internally. Cultural context mattered here. American culture respects reinvention. Starting again is not shameful. It is often admired. Internalizing that perspective eased my self-judgment. When cultural permission aligns with personal desire, action becomes easier. I realized that starting again does not require certainty. It requires participation. Showing up imperfectly. Saying yes cautiously. Asking questions without apology. Language became my proof. Each meaningful conversation showed that continuity exists even after rupture. Skills carry over. Wisdom accumulates. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from experience. The question shifted over time. It stopped being "can you start again?" and became "how do you want to continue?" That shift is powerful. It moves you from defense to authorship. If you are standing at this point, unsure whether to move forward or stay safe, remember this. You have already started again many times. Every day you chose to speak. To listen. To stay. Starting again is not a single decision. It is a pattern of small permissions. And once you see that, the future stops feeling like a test. It feels like a conversation you are finally ready to join. What remains when the story ends? The final section does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives the way understanding always does, quietly, after repetition, after patience, after you stop forcing meaning and allow it to surface. By now, the story has unfolded through loss, rebuilding, learning, doubt, and renewal. What remains is not a lesson written in bold letters. It is a feeling you recognize without needing to name. When I look back at the beginning, I see a person who wanted answers. Clear rules. A guarantee that effort would equal results. That belief is common among learners and among people who are hurting. It feels fair. But life rarely works in straight lines, and language learning reflects that truth with honesty. English did not save me. It did something quieter and more important. It gave structure to my healing. Each sentence practiced was an act of order in a time of chaos. Each conversation was proof that connection was still possible. Over time, those small proofs accumulated into something solid. There is a cognitive concept called narrative identity. Humans understand themselves through stories. When a major event disrupts life, the story breaks. Healing begins when a new narrative forms, not by erasing the old one, but by including it in a broader arc. Language is the medium through which this happens. As my English improved, my inner narrative changed. I stopped describing myself as starting over and began seeing myself as continuing differently. That single shift removed pressure. Continuation allows pauses. Starting over demands perfection. Listening became the foundation. Not passive listening, but intentional listening. To tone. To emotion. To what people avoided saying. This kind of listening develops empathy. Empathy improves communication. Communication strengthens belonging. Belonging is often misunderstood. It is not about fitting in perfectly. It is about being understandable. Language creates understandability. When others can follow your thoughts, even imperfectly, you feel seen. Being seen reduces fear. By this stage, English no longer felt like a skill separate from life. It blended into daily routines. Thinking happened in two languages without effort. Dreams occasionally borrowed English phrases. That is when you know a language has become part of your identity. Yet mastery was never the goal. Expression was. The ability to say what matters when it matters. To ask for help without shame. To offer kindness without hesitation. These are advanced language functions, often overlooked in textbooks. I noticed something else as well. The slower I spoke, the more confident I felt. Speed had once been a shield. Slowness became a choice. It allowed clarity. It invited patience from listeners. It created space. This is important for you as a learner. Fluency is not speed. Fluency is ease. Ease comes from trust, in yourself and in the listener. Trust cannot be rushed. Emotionally, the ending of this journey did not feel like closure. It felt like stability. The kind that does not need constant reinforcement. I could be quiet without feeling invisible. I could speak without rehearsing every word. That balance is rare and valuable. I also learned to respect silence. Silence in conversation is not failure. It is processing. In some cultures, silence is wisdom. Allowing it changed how others responded to me. Conversations deepened. English felt richer. There were still moments of insecurity. That never fully disappears. But insecurity stopped controlling my behavior. I could notice it and continue anyway. That is resilience. The biggest insight came unexpectedly. One evening, after a long conversation with someone new, I realized I had not thought about my accent once. Not before speaking. Not while listening. Not after. The absence of that thought was the milestone. Accent anxiety is not about sound. It is about belonging. When belonging is felt internally, the mind stops monitoring itself. Energy shifts outward. Communication improves naturally. If you are listening to this story while learning English, understand this. Progress is happening even when you cannot measure it. Especially then. The brain consolidates learning during rest, reflection, and emotional safety. Do not wait to feel ready before you speak. Readiness is not a prerequisite. It is a result. The story ends here, but the practice does not. Language, like life, is ongoing. Some days feel fluent. Some days feel clumsy. Both are valid. Both belong. What remains when the story ends is not English itself. It is confidence built through consistency. It is patience learned through struggle. It is a quieter mind that no longer rushes to judge itself. If you take one thing from this journey, let it be this. You are allowed to grow slowly. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to sound like someone who is learning, because that is exactly who you are. And learning, when done with kindness, always leads somewhere worth being. Thank you for listening. This is not the end of your journey with English. It is only the moment where listening becomes understanding, and understanding becomes confidence. If this story reached you, it's because something inside you is ready to grow. Not faster. Not louder. But deeper. Every word you heard today is meant to stay with you, quietly shaping the way you think, listen, and speak. And here's the truth most channels won't tell you. Real fluency is built in moments like this, when you feel calm, focused, and emotionally connected. That's why the next videos on this channel go even further. Deeper stories. Slower English. Stronger transformation. Subscribe now to continue this journey with long-form, slow, clear English stories designed to train your listening, reading, and speaking naturally, without pressure. Like this video if it helped you feel more confident or peaceful while learning. Comment below with one sentence you understood clearly today. That single action strengthens your memory more than you think. New stories are waiting for you here, stories that don't just teach English, but change the way you experience it. Stay. Listen again. And let the next video guide you one step closer to real, natural English fluency.